Good morning to you, and it's Friday morning. Welcome to the Vicarage. Lovely to see you, and thank you so much for being with us for our Bible talk for today. Friends, we are on our journey through the book of Hebrews, a book which I didn't know that well before, but I'm getting to know it much better now. And it's good stuff, isn't it? I love the book of Hebrews. I'm glad to say there's several chapters more of it yet. And we're in chapter 4 stroke chapter 5 this morning. So without further ado, I'll go straight into it. Hebrews chapter 4, starting to read at verse 14. Since then, we have a great high priest who's passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Let's therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Every high priest chosen from among mortals is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness, and because of this he must offer sacrifice for his own sins as well as those for the people. And one does not presume to take this honour, but takes it only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself in becoming a high priest, but was appointed by the one who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he says also in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This evening I'm off to go and visit my aunt and uncle, my godfather and his wife, my aunt. And my auntie tells a story that when she was at school, she went to a boarding school, and the local church didn't have any bells, so they used to have a record instead that they'd play occasionally to summon people to worship. And so it was that these naughty schoolgirls got into the church, went up the bell tower, and replaced the record with bells on it with a pop music record, which they then proceeded to play to blast out to all the local people in the local area. Without realising, unfortunately, that as happened so often with records, the old LP style, the record got a notch in it, and it kept going round and round and round. And you could imagine what the local neighbours thought about that. Anyway, she's a bit older now, but just as lovely. Anyway, the point I'm making is, why did I share that? Because I think sometimes when we're doing Bible reading, we can feel a bit like a record that's got stuck. And in a sense, I do a little bit in this morning's reading, because this reading begins again with the clarion call, which comes round and through, loud and clear, through this book of Hebrews again and again and again. You know, you may be having a hard time. You may feel like giving up, but don't. Hang on in there. Keep the faith. Keep looking to Jesus. So he begins with, what does he say? He says, since we have a great high priest who's passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let's hold fast to our confession. So again, they're repeating that message which is going round like a record that's got stuck. Keep on in there, folks. Keep hold of, carry on with our profession. Let's hold fast to our confession. Keep the faith, he's basically saying there. And then he goes on to give us several reasons why, yet more reasons if we didn't enough, or we had enough already, to remind us why we should keep to our confession. Firstly, he talks about Jesus, our great high priest, who says he's one who's not unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but was tempted in every way we are, yet without sin. Why is this important? Well, I think life is tough sometimes, isn't it? And sometimes we have to make difficult choices. I had a fantastic Alpha session last night. We're talking about moral dilemmas and things, and how the Christian life is not always an easy one. And because sometimes it can be tough, and life can be tough, and temptation, all sorts of ways, can be strong, and the temptation to give up, the temptation to be less courageous in our faith, those temptations can be very, very strong. And what this tells us here is that Jesus was tempted just as we are, yet without sin. So we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with us, but one who was tempted in everywhere as we are, yet without sin. Jesus understands, what strong temptation feels like. Jesus will have been tempted to give up. Jesus will have been, I'm sure, sexually tempted. Jesus will have been tempted to be, all sorts of things. The temptations and the stresses and strains of life that we feel, Jesus has felt them because he's been there. The only difference, of course, is that he didn't sin. So I think it's really important. One of the reasons why we should hold fast to our confession, one of the reasons we should keep to our faith is because we have a friend in heaven who knows what it's like. Christianity is the most kind of earthy religion because it's a religion where God does not just sit up in heaven dishing out instructions. It's a religion where God got stuck in, where Jesus, God in human form, came and lived among us. Isn't that the great thing about Christmas? That God, who could have had his son in could have been born in some lovely hotel in a Hollywood son, was actually born in a Pui cowshed to a teenage single parent mother in a Palestinian backwater, became an asylum seeker. Isn't that fantastic? Jesus, God amongst us, understands what temptation feels like. He's been there and he's been tempted and experienced weakness in every way as we are, yet without sin. And that's so important to kind of remember that. And then he goes on to talk about, so that's the first thing, that Jesus understands temptation. Jesus has been there and gone through it himself. Then he goes on to say, he's one who's able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward. Gently is a slightly odd translation of it. It means that he's able to deal right. It's mean that our judge in heaven, if you like, because he's been through it, because he's able to sympathize with our weakness, it means he's on our side. It means he is our high priest, who's the one who puts in a good word for us from God, the one who prays to God on our behalf. And he can do it in full knowledge because he knows what life feels like. So you can go to the pearly gates and say, but life is hard. And Jesus says, yeah, I know. I've been there. I understand. And that's just so important. Because he's been there, he can deal gently with us. He can deal rightly with us. So 2 reasons so far why we should keep the faith. We should keep to our confession. Firstly, because we have a high priest in Jesus who's been through it, who understands and experienced temptation, yet didn't sin. And secondly, because of this, he's able to deal gently. He's able to deal rightly and sympathetically with us in our weakness too. But third thing is really about being a priest and about being called to it. In the Church of England and other denominations too, if somebody experiences, they feel called by God to do something, they're quite keen to test that, to check that testing over, to make sure it really is of God, to make sure that it isn't, last night's curry or something like that going on, to make sure it's not just somebody having a jumped up idea on an ego trip or whatever it may be. And so because of that, the CFE, and I know other denominations too, they test that out. They ask difficult questions and they put them through, interviews and experiences, and they make it take a year or two just to make sure they're still serious about it. To make sure that it's not someone just having a jumped up idea, I think I'll do this tomorrow, or, I fancy an ego trip, or I've done everything else in life, I might try this one as well, to make sure that it isn't just them thinking this is a good idea, but that it really is God calling them to it. And in the reading here, as well as having a high priest who's able to sympathize with our weaknesses, as well as having a high priest who's able to deal gently and sympathetically with us, we also hear very strongly that Jesus was called by God. Because he quotes here from, it's actually Psalm 2, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." It wasn't just, Jesus wasn't some jumped up guy on an ego trip. The Bible's making clear here, the book of Hebrews is making quite clear here, that Jesus being who he is was God's idea, that he was really called by God. That he didn't just wake up one morning and think, I'll become a Messiah. He was God's idea. He was called by God. He was God, of course, but he was very much called by God, and it was it was God who appointed him as who he is. It wasn't just his ego, but it was God's idea. God appointed him to that task, and for that's another reason why we should hold to the faith. So, Again, at the risk of repeating myself, but I guess that's what the book of Hebrews does. And I guess if it repeats itself, it means it's blooming important, doesn't it? And we should hold fast to our confession. Again, hang on in there, folks. Keep the faith. Keep being brave. Keep trusting. Keep believing. Why? And I get more reasons here. Firstly, because we have a high priest who has experienced temptation as we are, yet without sin. A second reason is because he's done that, he's sympathetic with us in our weaknesses, in our trials and temptations. And thirdly, because it wasn't just his idea that he did what he did. It was God who appointed him. It was God who blessed him. And it was God's plan that he did what he did. God bless you. Have a lovely week. And do join us online for the services over the weekend, or come and join in face to face. Even better, join face to face. We'd absolutely love to see you in church. It's a great place.